Hello and welcome to this video. On this video, I'm going to be going through my 10 favorite artists or bands and trying to make a decision what their best album is, but also what their worst album is. Now, this was suggested to me only yesterday by a viewer of the channel. I can't remember their name, but I do appreciate you very much for giving me this idea. I get all sorts of ideas suggested to me that I should do on the channel, and they're always rubbish. But this is a great idea, and the thing I like about it is you're going to get 3 ranking videos for the price of 1. So I'm going to be going through my 10 favourite artists. I will be telling you what I think is their best album, but even better, I'm going to be telling you what their worst album is, because people love it when I become negative. The views go straight up. Right, so, are you ready for this? Now, what's my criteria for this? Well, this is totally me, isn't it? So I can just decide what I want to put on. So even if you go to some of the ranking videos of the bands or artists I've picked and you get to number 1, those decisions will be a little bit more objective than here. Here I've literally just put my favourite album down. And I've also put what I think is their worst album now. Now, these artists being my favourite, most of them don't have bad albums. So some of these albums that are the worst ones, I absolutely love, and I'll tell you that. But some of them are dire, right? So this is the interesting thing about this, is just to see which artists really make a mistake. I'll be trying to explain more why I don't like a certain album than when I do like a certain album, because a lot of these albums I've covered elsewhere on the channel. Shall we kick straight in with this one then? Right, so 10 artists, 10 to 1 ranked. Now, this was the hardest bit, was coming up with this ranking of the artists. I basically went, well, that guy's my favourite, and then I'm probably like that person's second favourite. And the first lot dropped down, and then the bottom ones here, they're all very similar. I would say from 10 to 5, you could jumble these up, but they've come out the way they've come out. I think there are things to take into account, like how long I've been listening to these artists, how much they mean to me, sort of in my sort of biography, because some of these artists have been there since day one. Whether I like the person as a musician or as a composer or somebody who makes albums. There's a lot of things here. So when I start at number 10 and tell you that my 10th favourite artist of all time is probably Allan Holdsworth, that does not mean anything. Oh my God. Has it really done that? Bum. My list. The list. I'm looking at my laptop. It's just run out of power and I haven't got my plug. I'll tell you what, I'm going to reconstitute this now. So hold on. I'll write it all out on a piece of paper if I can remember it. So I just took a few minutes to write it down on a bit of paper, which was quite a useful thing to do, actually, because it forced me to remember what I'd come up with, which I have remembered. I haven't faked it. I actually can remember it all. So I think that's made me feel that my list is a little bit more substantial. So anyway, where were we? Number 10, Allan Holdsworth. Allan Holdsworth is perhaps the greatest improvising musician of the last 50 years. Whoever that would be, it would have to be on the guitar. When jazz emerges in the 1920s, it's really the trumpet which is the most important instrument. It's the lead instrument. It's the lead instrumental voice. By the time the beboppers come along, the saxophone has replaced that with players like Coleman Hawkins and Lester Young and Charlie Parker. But when we get to the era of rock and roll, the saxophone is replaced by the guitar. It becomes the preeminent instrument. Eventually to be replaced by the sampler and the sequencer and the digital audio workstation. But for the latter part of the 20th century, the guy that took the guitar further out, did more with it technically, artistically, creatively, it has to be Allan Holdsworth. So his positioning at number 10 is really down to the fact that his albums are some of my favourite albums, but I don't think they quite are in the masterpiece level of some of the ones we're going to be dealing with later. But they're incredible stuff. So what's my favourite album by Allan Holdsworth? I really had to have a good think about this one. The first IOU album I absolutely love. I nearly had that one down. Metal Fatigue, which has got more vocals and a little bit more rocky, I nearly had that one down. But I discovered Holdsworth, I would say, in the mid-'80s, probably about 84. And I started to collect his albums. By the time I was an absolutely huge fan, he teamed up with one of the greatest drummers that's ever lived, Vinnie Colaiuta. And in 1989, he did an album called Secrets. And this was at the peak of my Allan Holdsworth love. And I travelled down to London in 1990 to see Allan Holdsworth play on the Secrets tour. So this album, above all the others, holds a special place. I was so excited that Vinnie Colaiuta was playing with Allan Holdsworth. Gary Husband and Chad Wackerman, who had been the drummers before, incredible drummers. But Vinnie Colaiuta was sort of famous for pushing the sort of polyrhythmical elements of rhythm to an extreme. And he had a way of tumbling through the time, which I thought was very similar to Alan's approach to time. And so they seem very suited, and they are. And this album occupies a special place for recording Allan Holdsworth and Vinnie Colaiuta together. So I can remember buying this album, and I put it on the platter, on the turntable. And the first track that kicked in was Gary Husband's composition City Nights, which is just a few minutes long, 3 or 4 minutes. But 3 or 4 minutes of possibly the greatest guitaring ever recorded and the greatest drumming. And then from this point on, the album just blew me away. Now, this was the third album in what you could call his guitar synclavier phase, which started with Sand and Octava Chron. And those albums I really liked, but I never felt that he quite nailed the sort of improvising with the guitar synth. This album he did. The guitar synth solos are equal to the actual guitar solos, and there's a really good balance between the two. It's got a wide variety of sounds and approaches on here. There's some, not heavy rock tracks, but there's tracks that are heavier and tracks that are more ethereal. There's a couple of vocal points, which I do enjoy when he has a vocal. I do. I'm weird like that. I just think this is his best album. And I think... Why do I think it's so good above all the rest? I think if you look at his journey from IOU, he's coming out of prog and fusion. It's definitely fusion. And as he moves through, by the time you get to 60 Men of Tain, he has moved much closer towards a more of a just a jazz way of playing. And I think Secrets is the sweet spot between those, right? After this album, he released Wardenclyffe Tower, and like I said, he released what would it have been? Hard Hat Area, and then Wardenclyffe, and then the one I just 16 Men of Tain. 16 Men of Tain came out in the year 2000, so we're looking at a 10-year of actually incredible output. And there's a few other ones. None Too Soon, where he did some jazz standards, a few other things. After then, he seems to lose his muse or something. I think he becomes a lot more troubled after 2000. So the last proper album by Allan Holdsworth is 16 Men of Tain, but he did manage to get another album out, which I've got down as being the worst of his albums. Now, you could argue that Velvet Darkness should be on the list, which he disowned. He felt he'd been tricked into making this solo album in the mid-70s by CTI. It's got Narada Michael Walton on drums, Alphonso Johnson on bass, I think Alan Pasca's on keyboards. It's an incredible album, and it just drops him into this sort of fusion jam setting, which we all love, but Alan didn't like it. But after he made 16 Men of Tain, he then made this album called Flat Tire, which was supposedly the music for an imaginary soundtrack. He created it using his synclavier. And I would say that this album is a good album, okay? It's not a bad album at all. I can listen to it and enjoy it, but when I'm listening to it, I'm enjoying much more Allan Holdsworth's vision. which I feel is a little bit compromised with the synclavier sounds. Sorry, these sort of keyboard sounds I think are a little bit cheesy. His vision's incredible. I mean, if anyone took this album and decided where to replace everything with and score it and replace it with real instruments, it could be one of the greatest albums ever made, because his compositional mind's incredible. And his ability to then improvise within these compositions is absolutely incredible. But for me, and I think a lot of people feel like this, it just doesn't quite deliver what we want from an Allan Holdsworth album. But it is a very good album. So I think, and this will become apparent on this list, is that some of these artists never made a bad album. Allan Holdsworth is in the camp that never made a bad album. So you can go away and buy any of his albums and you will not be let down, even Flat Tire. But like I said, it is my least favourite. So let's move on to number 9 now. My 9th most favourite band or artist is a band, and that band's called Yes. For me, Yes embody progressive rock. They were one of the first progressive rock bands I ever heard. I was into new wave of British heavy metal when I discovered Yes, and it changed my life completely. And it made me realise there was other music out there that was much more outlandish. So they opened the door for me, to go towards the, more and more weirder prog, and then jazz rock fusion, then free jazz, and all the different music, experimental music, electronic. The door was opened by Yes. And I feel that Yes's greatest album is Close to the Edge, without a doubt. And initially, I wrote that one down straight off. Well, their greatest album is Close to the Edge. But for me, my favourite album is the album that I discovered all this through. And it is the Yes album. Now, the Yes album is a bit of a strange album because it does not have Rick Wakeman on it. So when Yes formed, you did not have Rick Wakeman in the band, and you did not have Steve Howe in the band. You had a keyboardist called Tony Kaye, and you had a guitarist called Peter Banks. So they were great. The first 2 albums are interesting. But with the addition of Steve Howe in 1970, 71, he seems to just put an energy into this band. And really, this is the point I feel that Yes are properly born. This is the first masterpiece album by Yes. Then Rick Wakeman comes in, and it takes on an even more opulent symphonic approach. And so for many people, Yes isn't quite like what we get on Fragile and Close to the Edge and Tales from Topographic Oceans. It's a different beast. But for me, there's a quality on that album which only exists on that album. And when I think of the sort of worm section of Starship Trooper, that, those 3 chords going round and round, it's just so sublime. And it almost feels like Yes have discovered this way of making music. And what's very interesting, even though what they're doing is so esoteric, they sold a lot of records. And so you get this thing with Yes that you've got a multi-million selling band. I think they've sold something like 30 or 40 million albums in total, making some very uncompromising music. And that is down, I think, to the incredible individuality of the musicians in this band. But more than anything else, it's down to John Anderson, who had a vision. And I'm hoping to interview John, and this is going to be the theme of my interview. I feel that throughout his career, right from the beginning, right up until now, John Anderson has been uncompromising in trying to document love on an album. It's Yes are always coming from a place of love. And I think that's why the sort of snotty elitist music critics put them down a little bit, because they want a bit of edge. But for me, there is a love of the world, a love of mystery and imagination. There's a love of people and harmony, and that always comes through in Yes's music, and it's on the Yes album. So I think John Anderson is key to the success of Yes. But Yes carried on, and it's quite well known that in the 1980s they made 90125, which I think is an incredible album. They went towards a sort of commercial FM sound that was very successful. They followed that up many years later with Big Generator. They sort of missed the momentum of 90125. Then they, got back together, and you get things like Union and all this type of things. And Yes start to stumble. You get Trevor Rabin makes the Talk album, which isn't a bad album, but it's not like a Yes album. But Yes toddle on making various albums of various quality. And then John Anderson gets ill. And Yes do a thing that I think people feel very bad about. And they sort of go and get another singer in. Benoit David, I think his name was. Then he gets ill, and they do the same thing to him. And they then bring in a singer called John Davison. Now, these singers they bring in, right, with Yes, you either sound like John Anderson, because that is essential to the sound of Yes, or you don't. So they have to get someone in who sounds like John Anderson. And for me, it's an imitation. But there's also something lacking for me in this approach where there's something missing, and it's missing more than anywhere else on the album Heaven and Earth, which is my least favourite Yes album, and I think is their worst album. And I think Heaven and Earth is a bit of a stinker. Now, why is it a bit of a stinker? Well, Steve Howe at the time thought that they'd done a good job, but when the reaction wasn't that positive, he sort of changed his tune, and in his autobiography, he criticised it a little bit. And I think some of his criticisms are valid in that he felt they hadn't worked enough on the tracks, and I think that is possibly the case. Now, the reason why that didn't happen is because they brought in the producer, Roy Thomas Baker, the guy famous for making the Queen albums. And although he brought in a lot of sort of 70s approach, which, and this sound does have the sort of sound of Yes in the 1970s. But, well, reading between the lines, there's a couple of things in Steve Howe's biography that he says. First of all, he said that he was in a great place. And he also says that he was going off to the toilet a lot of the time. So it was either IBS or something else. It was one end or the other. There was either something coming out of one end or more likely something going up the other end, if you know what I'm saying. I don't want to mention that sort of behaviour on my channel because it is YouTube. And so I think you can lay the blame of this album being not being developed well enough. The mixes are okay, but what's really missing from it is people think it's missing an epic. And apparently they did record an epic and it never got finished. And I think there's a feeling that if there'd have been an epic on there, it might have made the album better. But for me, that's not what is wrong with it. If you go back to the Yes album, the Yes album is an album by a rock band. Yes rocks. Now, they can be all airy-fairy and they can put out that sort of message of positivity and love that John Anderson just does so well. But the heaviness in Yes does not come from the guitar. It comes from the bass. Now, Chris Squire, this was his last album. He passed away later on. I don't know if that's affected it. But that sound between the drums and the bass, the thing that sounds heavy, when you listen to Roundabout and it kicks in, the reason why everyone loves that is because it rocks. This album doesn't rock. It's insipid. It's limp. And, that's the problem with it. And maybe if it had been developed more, it would have been successful. But I can't see how that was the case. I think at this point, and I felt this with Yes for a long time, is the vision behind Yes. It's John Anderson's band. And although Steve Howe, as we said, when he came in 1970, 71, he revolutionised that band. But I don't think Steve Howe's vision is full of love like John Anderson's is. There, I've said it. I think I've really nailed it. More than even on my Yes top tens of what Yes's strengths are and also why this album's not so good. Shall we move on to number 8? At number 8, I have Weather Report. You guys know I'm a jazz fusion fan, so there's going to be a lot of fusion on here. Weather Report are one of the seminal jazz fusion bands. They made a lot of albums. I've recently ranked them all, so I won't spend too much time on this. But anyone who watched that will know that Black Market is my favourite album. There's a sweet period which runs, I think, from Sweet Nighter through to Mysterious Traveller, through to Tail Spinning, through to Black Market and up to Heavy Weather, where they can do absolutely no wrong. Those are the best albums for me. I actually think that the bringing in Jaco Pastorius and then having a huge hit record with Birdland almost unseats the band. They're still an incredible live album, but live band, but I don't think they quite know what to do in the studio. Mr. Gone suffers from that a little bit, and they sort of lose their way, and then we get to the 80s. So there's this sweet spot, and I feel that the best of those albums is Black Market. And the reason why Black Market just edges the other ones out is there's some incredible compositions on there. You know, Cannonball by Joe Zawinul was one of the great jazz compositions of all time. Elegant People by Wayne Shorter, incredible compositions. But there's two X factors on this. One is Jaco's just emerged. So you've got Alfonso's on fire on this album. Alfonso Johnson, I always feel that his bass player is incredible, but Jaco's on here at all. And you feel that Jaco comes in and he discovers himself on this album. Of course, the famous story is that Jaco came in and started to play on Cannonball, which was a tribute to Cannonball Adderley, who Joe Zawinul played for, had recently died. And he was doing all these tricks and all that, and Zawinul turned around to him and said, you know, don't play that shit all over my track. And that, as Narada Michael Walden said to me in an interview I did with him, was the point where Jaco was born, and I agree. And you hear that. You hear it on that album. And he's so good that even though he's just joined the band, Zawinul is sure to go, do you want to bring a track in? And you get Funky Barbary Coast. Every track's brilliant on here. But you also get Narada Michael Walden. And Narada Michael Walden is my favourite drummer. And the reason is whatever he comes into, he seems to grab it and kick it right up the arse. And he brings in something. He did it with Jeff Beck. He did it with the Mahavishnu Orchestra. He did it even with King Crimson. If you go and listen to Exposure by Robert Fripp, even then. And he does it with Weather Report here. And Black Market is... Because for me, Weather Report are amazing, but this sort of soloing, not soloing approach, sometimes I want them to burn. They burn on Tail Spinning, you know, and that's really is a great album. It's rapidly becoming my second favourite Weather Report album. But on Black Market, they just burn, and Wayne Shorter, he's funky on that. So that's their best album as far as I'm concerned. Their worst album is their last album from 1986. It's called This Is This. It was a contractual obligation. They thought they'd fulfilled their contract. They decided to call it a day. They all wanted to go off and do their own thing. But then they realised they got to do this other album. Wayne Shorter wasn't that interested, so he didn't even come to the sessions. So they had to get Carlos Santana in. Carlos Santana's great, but he upsets the sort of dynamic of the band. Is this a bad album? No. I would class this as a good album. It's not a great album. It's not a masterpiece, excellent album. But it's a good album. When I first heard it, I was so let down because I actually am a fan of the album, the 80s albums that precede it, Sporting Life, Procession, and Domino Theory. But this one isn't quite up in that bracket for me. Some people hate Sporting Life. I absolutely love it. You know, I think it's brilliant. I think they're great compositions. Bobby McFerrin's on there doing all this stuff's brilliant. This one's good. When I first heard it, I didn't like it, and then, you know, a few years back when I was doing my Weather Report ranking, I went back and listened to it again, and I thought, you know, there's some killer grooves on here. The production's great. There's some good soloings. It's solos. It's a good album, and that's what I say. So Weather Report, unlike Yes, are in the bracket of never made a bad album. That's what I would say there. Right, let's move on to King Crimson. That I've got a number 7. King Crimson are the highest rated progressive rock band on this list. After this, it's all jazz and jazz rock. Sorry. King Crimson are possibly my favourite progressive rock band. But the thing about King Crimson, I'm not so keen on that first period. For me, King Crimson become brilliant when they make Lark's Tongues in Aspic. And those 3 albums, Lark's Tongues in Aspic, and then Starless and the Bible Black, and then Red, are my favourite King Crimson albums. I also love the 80s albums, Discipline, Beat, and Three of a Perfect Pair. Now, I know there's people out here that some people wouldn't like Three of a Perfect Pair. Some people don't like Beat. I think it's bonkers. I think it's incredible. Put on Neurotica, it's an incredible track. When they came back with Thrack and Vroom and Construction of Light and all that stuff, that's all great. So, you know, I like all that stuff. My favourite period is the John Wetton period. Of those 3 albums, I could have picked any one. They all have their own character. But the one that sits there just being absolutely perfect in its construction is Red. Red is just sits there sublime. Side 1 is just perfect King Crimson. Then side 2, you get an improvisation, and then you get one of the greatest prog epics ever, Starless. So that's what I've got as my favourite one, would be Red. The worst ones, well, you see, I know people love these albums, right? So let's take the first album, because I nearly put this one in. I nearly said that this was their worst album. I knew I'd get lynched by the prog lot watching this. In the Court of the Crimson King, 21st Century Schizoman is one of the greatest tracks ever made. In the Court of the Crimson King embodies, the actual title track embodies progressive rock. But there's a lot of flapping around and some weird free improvisation and a lot of flowery stuff. And I think it's an uneven album. It's groundbreaking, without a doubt. It's an uneven album. And then you get In the Wake of Poseidon, which is basically they do it all again. And it's a very similar sound. But I quite like In the Wake of Poseidon. And then we get these two albums, Lizard and Islands. I don't like those albums. I'll tell you how much I don't like them. As a kid, I bought them on CD. King Crimson are one of my favourite bands. And when I listened to those albums, I disliked them so much that I sold them. I didn't even think, well, I'll just keep them because I want to have all the King Crimson albums. And I wish I still had them now. But I sold them because I was really upset at how rubbish they were. So as a kid, there was something about these albums I didn't like. Now, I've had a toss-up with which one I dislike the least out of Lizard and Islands. And I think the one I dislike the most is Islands. Now, they're very similar. Now, I put them on the other day, just before this list. Yesterday, I listened to it. It's pretty good, actually. It's like weird proggy jazz. It's quite introverted and abstract, and strange solos come in, and actually quite like it now. And the second track on there, I can't remember what it's called, but there's a nice frick guitar. It's actually good. It's nowhere near in the same bracket as something like Red for me. It sounds very much like the sort of Canterbury, Soft Machine, Van der Graaf Generator, noodly prog that I've never been quite a fan of. But there's a track on here called, is it called Ladies of the Road? See, when I don't like an album, it's really hard for me to record. Ladies of the Road is absolutely awful. The music's like nondescript, same flowery nonsense. But is it Peter Sinfield's lyrics? They're absolutely misogynistic, sexist nonsense. And how this could exist on a King Crimson album. And then for that one track alone, it demotes the album. Now, where would I place this? I would say this album is okay. Right? On a scale of truly awful, mediocre, okay, good, great, masterpiece, I would say it's on the okay. I think at my age now, and doing this channel and listening to a lot more prog and getting it a lot more, it's in a way it's a groundbreaking album, isn't it? And I know people on here, the prog fans, are going to be shouting at me, saying, "How can you not like Lizard? How can you not like Islands?" The other thing with Lizard, it's got a brilliant cover, hasn't it? It's got that old English sort of letter thing that the monks used to do. You know, the monks would write those really detailed letters. I can't remember what they're called. I love the cover to Lizard. But Islands, it's just a picture of space. And it's rubbish. I don't like Islands. I should stick it in the bin. Right, shall we move on to number 6? At number 6, I would say my 6th favourite artist stroke band of all time is Chick Corea, which includes Return to Forever and all that type of stuff, without a doubt. Now, my favourite album, I thought, well, I'm going to have a Return to Forever album, and it would have been Romantic Warrior, although Hymn to the Seventh Galaxy is vying for me. But all the Return to Forever albums are amazing, but it's not my favourite Chick Corea album. My favourite Chick Corea album is 3 quartets that he made in 1980, where he put this incredible quartet which featured him on acoustic piano, Steve Gadd on drums, Eddie Gomez on bass, and the incredible Michael Brecker on saxophone. This album's just incredible. It's an acoustic album, but it kicks, it rocks, it takes your head off. And you hear these players like Steve Gadd, who we know has been this sort of cool, funky drummer, but every now and then he flies, doesn't he? Every now and then he just tears it to bits. He does it on Asia, and everyone goes on about Asia, but he does it even more on Night Sprite by Chick Corea, which is off the Let record. That's incredible drumming. But on this one, he swings and he kills it. And he gets right underneath Michael Brecker and he pushes Michael Brecker. And Michael Brecker is just sublime. It's some of the greatest saxophone playing of the last 60 years. Chick Corea is incredible. The compositions are incredible. It's recorded absolutely beautiful. Three Quartets is an absolute masterpiece. Steve Gadd's drum, I think they're called like Three Quartets, aren't they? Like number one. The last one has got a Steve Gadd drum solo, which is his best drum solo. And the track that opens up the album has just got this incredible Michael Brecker solo. When Chick Corea died, Rick Beato came on and he played that first track off Three Quartets. I can never remember the names. I think it's just called Quartet 1, Quartet 2, and Quartet 3. I think that's what they're called. It's an incredible album, absolutely sublime. And what's incredible is around the same time that Chick Corea was making this album, he was making the album that I've got as his worst album. Now, this isn't just Chick Corea's worst album. This isn't just one of the worst jazz albums of all time. It is the worst album ever made. Chick Corea has made the worst album ever. It's the worst album ever made, right? There's just no two ways about it. I keep coming back to it on this channel because when I discovered it, I was horrified by it. It's so unbelievably bad, right? So around about 1980, Chick Corea acquired a synclavier. And a synclavier is this thing that can sample, and it cost about £250,000, and you could suddenly sample. It was the first sort of computer-based sampling thing, right? Now, Chick Corea he was a Scientologist, right? So he's part of the Scientology cult. I've spoken to a number of people who've played with him, and they all do mention the sort of almost like cultish way in which he ran his bands and quite strange sort of stuff. Now, I love Chick Corea, and he does seem like a lovely man, you know, when you see him and people talk about him. But there is something a little bit weird with his Scientology thing. And it sort of keeps creeping in. And a lot of the sort of terrible things he does on his albums, you know, when he does concept albums, you get these weird L. Ron Hubbard poetry on there and that whole thing. It's all a bit strange. Now, Stanley Clarke was a Scientologist as well. I don't know if he is now. He's making too much good music now and doing too much good stuff to still be a Scientologist. So I'm guessing, you know, in the last few years, because his recent albums are incredible, especially the ones with Hiromi. They're incredible. So I'm just guessing he's not a Scientologist anymore. But he was a Scientologist. And somehow L. Ron Hubbard roped in Chick Corea and Stanley Clarke to make this album that came out something like 1982, 83, called Space Jazz. I can't even say it because I've tried to wipe it off my memory. It's so bad. I'm going to give you a space to stop the video and open up another tab and go and listen to this album. But don't come back, won't you? But I know you're going to want to go and listen to it. And I promise you, however bad you think it is, it will be worse. It's bad on so many different levels. It's supposedly the soundtrack to Battlefield Earth, although there's no film like that. It's an imaginary soundtrack, a bit like Allan Holdsworth, but nothing like Allan Holdsworth. It's an imaginary soundtrack to one of L. Ron Hubbard's bonkers, you know, books. And yes, Chick Corea's on there, Stanley Clarke. But it's mainly these compositions by L. Ron Hubbard that have been done on some sort of computer music things. It sounds like the worst computer game music. All these really pathetically cheesy tiny little fanfares going on, and they just go on, and then Chick Corea appears, and then at one point you hear that beautiful signature bass line of Stanley Clarke, which is obscene in this setting. You've also got Gail Moran. Gail Moran's on here as well. You know, she has to be on here. And if you go and check out my recent interview with Al Di Meola, he said something on there which just shocked me, that Return to Forever in 1976 were going to become one of the biggest bands in the world. If they'd have kept going, jazz fusion may have gone in a completely different direction, and they might have had world domination, and we'd all be sitting here now listening to, you know, the duel between the jester and the tyrant would be the big cultural thing. But it never happened. You know why it didn't happen? Because Chick Corea had copped off with Gail Moran. He married her in the end, made an honest woman of her. But the thing is, he tried to get her in Return to Forever. He tried to pull her in, and they wouldn't have it. They put it to a vote, and they all said no, and then Chick Corea got enough, so he packed Return to Forever in there. Well, he didn't pack it in, did he? He went and made those two albums, Music Magic and Return to Forever Live, and nobody even thinks of those. When I did my Return to Forever ranking, I had to stick him in there. I had to listen to him. And they're not bad albums, but they're more his sort of composite. And they stopped Return to Forever. Gail Moran's responsible for a lot, I tell you. She's bloody brilliant on Apocalypse by Mavis Knoxtra. And I do love her voice, but it can get on your nerves sometimes. Anyway, Space Jazz, worst album ever made. And I'm so glad that it's on this list. So Chick Corea, without a doubt, goes in the same place as Yes have made some cruddy albums. Right, let's move to number 5, shall we? So at number 5, I've got Led Zeppelin. I just love Led Zeppelin. I've loved Led Zeppelin since I first started listening to music. They are the greatest rock band of all time. I could put any Led Zeppelin album on, except for one, and I'm in my happy place. With Led Zeppelin, I'm in my happy place. I'll tell you that now. What's my favourite album by Led Zeppelin? Well, it's the untitled one, also known as 4 Symbols, sometimes called Led Zepp 4. I tend to call it Led Zepp 4. Seems logical, doesn't it? That album's just incredible. Side 1, Black Dog, Rock and Roll, Battle of Evermore, Stairway to Heaven. Greatest side in all of rock and pop music, would you say? Flip it over, and then it gets weirder. You get like Misty Mountain Hop, you get 4 Sticks, Going to California, and When the Levee Breaks. I mean, it's all incredible. Few people don't like those 2 tracks. I don't like 4 Sticks, and some people don't like Misty Mountain Hop. I absolutely love Misty Mountain Hop. I just love it. The production's incredible. The playing's incredible. Jimmy Page's guitar everything sounds amazing. Bonham's at his peak. You even get Sandy Denny from Fairport Convention crop up on Battle of Evermore, and if anything embodies English aesthetic, forget Fairport Convention and the incredible string band and Pentangle. I all love those. I do love those bands. But if I really want a dose of the English aesthetic and I can feel like some, it's elfin-like character bounding my way through the forest, in a Tolkien-esque way, I'm going to put on Battle of Evermore. I just absolutely love it. So that's my favourite Zepp album. My least favourite Zepp album is In Through the Outdoor. Now, some people don't like Presence. Presence is one of my favourite Zepp albums. I think they're at their peak. As a band, they're at their peak there. Some people don't like Coda. I think Coda's incredible. I really do. And the tracks on Coda that were done at the same time as In Through the Outdoor, they're better than anything on In Through the Outdoor. In Through the Outdoor sounds muddy. It lacks energy. It's too keyboardy. Jimmy Page is a bit out of it, and his guitar solo is a bit strange. The compositions are in the evening. That's like the rocker, and it just limps on. It's all right. And then you get things like Hot Dog and all these Southbound Sarahs, and it's all a bit like pastiche. Hot Dog. They always did comedy stuff. They do it on Houses of the Holy, and you have a little snigger. But it's okay. You could do that if you've just done No Quarter, or even Dancing Days, or The Ocean, right? Or you could, if you've rocked out to something like that, then you're allowed to do a bit of a Jamaica, without a doubt. But when you haven't done that, don't be giving me Hot Dog, especially when you got Wearing and Tearing in the can and you haven't put it on. Carousel Alhambra, which is the epic on there, I quite like. That's okay, but it just go on for a bit, doesn't it? Keeps dropping down. Come on. Drops down again. What else is on there? All of My Love is a beautiful song, and I think that's my favourite track. If I was doing the best of Led Zeppelin, I would take that one track off that album, put it on the best of the rest. And the last one, what's it called? The last one, I don't like. It's like a slow blues. I don't like it. I know some people like it. Robert Plant lets out a strange scream at the end of that album, which I think sums up the whole album. It's like a sort of frustrated at the end of it, which has always summed the whole thing up. I'm not a fan of In Through the Outdoor. Some people love it, but I don't. So that's what I got at number 5. But I don't think it's a bad album. I don't think Led Zeppelin have made a bad album. So there's still only Chick and Yes in the special club of dud albums, but we've got a few coming up, I promise you. Right, so at number 4, I've got John Coltrane. John Coltrane is just, I can't live without John Coltrane. John Coltrane made a lot of albums, 100, 150 albums, something like that. Um, what are known in his greatest albums? Maybe Giant Steps, maybe My Favorite Things, definitely A Love Supreme. Of the three albums, probably Meditations or Interstellar Space. That would be there. I've just gone through. If you want to go and get 5 albums or something to represent Coltrane, those would be the albums. But none of those are my favorite album. My favorite album by John Coltrane is Live at Birdland, because it does so much. Absolutely so much. So if you buy Love Supreme, incredible album, but it's very spiritual and it's very meditational. It's got this overall thing where it doesn't really blow. He doesn't blow. On Live at Birdland, he really blows, right? He plays soprano sax on Live at Birdland. You get one of those drums and saxophone duets. He does a cadenza on it, and the cadenza that Coltrane plays is one of the most incredible pieces of solo music ever made by anybody in the history of mankind. And Alabama seems to condense all that feeling that's in A Love Supreme, but in a mournful way, into that one track. It's so wide. A lot of Coltrane albums, if you buy a Coltrane album, say you've bought Impressions, on side one you've got Impressions, and then you've got a little track at the end, and then you've got India, a little track at the end, and it's all sort of one thing, and you have to buy into that, and I love buying into that. But Birdland has got so much colour, and it's so well recorded. Some of it's live, some of it's in the studio. It's just Coltrane's best album for me. But like I said, it was one of the first Coltrane albums I ever bought, and like I said, this does colour your opinion of it. But I go back to it now. It's an incredible album. So 150 albums, and this is a testament to Coltrane. What's his worst album? It's masterpiece after masterpiece after masterpiece after masterpiece. He's like, makes a masterpiece, and then 2 weeks later he goes back in studio, makes another masterpiece. Because Coltrane, the albums are just embodying him. The quartet with Alvin Jones and Jimmy Garrison and McCoy Tyner, they're so at one with each other that they can just walk it. They can play anything. They could play Inchworm from Hans Christian Andersen, which they do, and it sounds amazing. They could play My Favorite Things from Sound of Music, sounds amazing. They can play anything they want, and it will just become the most sublime music. So the only way of finding the worst album by John Coltrane is to go to the earlier stuff in the 1950s, where he's finding his sound. And I went back and had a list of those albums, and I'm putting on those albums and going, oh my God, this is amazing, this is amazing. And at that time, Coltrane's doing this Sheets of Sound thing, which is incredible. So I've decided to go for an album he made with the Red Garland Trio called Training In. It's pretty much the Red Garland Trio with Coltrane added to it. They're just playing straight jazz standards. The album opens up and you don't even hear Coltrane start off with his Red Garland does his thing. It's straight down the line hard bop. It doesn't reinvent the wheel. There's nothing earth-shattering about it. Coltrane comes in. He's all over it and incredible. It's a very, very good album, made by master musicians, but it's possibly Coltrane's worst album. But I would put it in the great. I think it's a great album. So Coltrane, on this list, he scores the highest. Hundreds of albums, all masterpieces. John Coltrane. My God, what a musician. Let's move on to number 3. At number 3, my third favourite artist or band of all time is Miles Davis. I don't know if I'd be here without Miles Davis. What a man, one of the greatest musicians of the 20th century. And again, he continually reinvented himself. And at every period, from Birth of the Cool in the 1940s to Working, Steaming and all those in the mid-50s, to Kind of Blue in the late 50s, to the Gil Evans stuff like Miles Ahead, Sketches of Spain, and then into the 60s with the incredible quintet with Wayne Shorter and Ron Carter and Tony Williams and Herbie Hancock. And you got Miles Smiles and Nefertiti, all the masterpieces. And then he goes fusion. You get in a silent way, Jack Johnson, and then you get all that 70s stuff. And even when he comes back in the 80s, I think those albums are brilliant. I think Aura's a masterpiece. I think Decoy's a masterpiece. I would say Tutu is a masterpiece. There's some incredible stuff there, but he is faltering a little bit there. But I think my favourite album by Miles Davis is Bitches Brew. It was a life-changing album for me. When I bought Bitches Brew, I didn't get it. I had to work at it. And the reason I worked on it, because I looked at all the musicians on there, John McLaughlin, Wayne Shorter, Joe Zawinul, Larry Young, Jack DeJohnette, all these incredible players on there. And I thought, this must be an incredible album. And I didn't get it. And it was difficult. Some of the tracks were nearly a half an hour long. And I just put it on and on and on. And I can remember the day. I had the headphones on, listening to the Spanish Key. And suddenly I was sat there focused, and I just started listening to the bass, and I was just focused on the bass going round and round and round, and then suddenly it made sense, and I could hear Miles Davis like this sort of like a ringmaster in this sort of voodoo-esque circus that was contained deep in the sort of Mayan, rainforests, in this secret temple. And he's there, and his trumpet comes out, and with all these incredible musicians there, none of them quite match Miles. He's separate from them all. There's almost like two bands. There's a funky band holding grooves down, and then there's another band colouring it. And every time Miles does something, the whole band writhes. It writhes. You go, and then it goes whoosh, whoosh, like this. And he uses his power to control this band and get them into a certain place. And then when he's there, you hear him saying, right, you stop, no, and you hear John, and then John McLaughlin comes in. And John McLaughlin's come to America. He's like come to the place of his dreams. He's in the studio with Miles Davis. He's made it in a silent way. And on only a silent way, John McLaughlin sounds like, oh, what's going on? But on Bitches Brew, he's Miles's muse. There's a track named after John McLaughlin. He's Miles's muse, and he's just all over the place. It's just incredible album. There's a moment on Bitches Brew, on Miles Runs the Voodoo Down. This electric piano solo comes in. I don't know who it is. It could well be Chick Corea. It sounds like Chick Corea. It's just utter noise, but the most beautiful noise you have ever heard. It's incredible. Bitches Brew stands alone for me in the sort of Miles Davis pantheon. Right. The worst album is perhaps his last studio album, Doo-Bop. So Miles was a canny guy, but he's getting on. Hip-hop's happened. He knows it's the new thing, and he wants to, he was always wanting to appeal to the street and to black kids and get his music out there. He wasn't interested in all the intelligentsia. So he decides to make a rap album. And if he'd gone and got Chuck D or somebody, it would have been brilliant. But he went and got this guy called Easy Mo B. And he goes into the studio and he toots his trumpet over some hip-hop beats and raps. Now, the thing that brings this down is not Miles. It's the fact that the hip hop is just okay. It's not LL Cool J. It's not NWA. It's not. Can you imagine if they'd done an album with Tribe Called Quest? I had a Public Enemy album the other day, and I thought, could you imagine if they brought Miles in on this? But it's Easy Mo B. It's very competent. But it's okay. And when people start rapping about Miles Davis, I just don't like it. Miles is the man who likes to play his horn. He's the greatest trumpet player ever been born. He walks around with a mystery voice because that's the way, and it's his choice. I don't know. Well, I can't stick raps about jazz. There's a certain points when after Miles had died, they went in and overdubbed into his trumpet playing. That's cool. There's a track where he does that. It's pretty cool. But Doo-Bop is just his worst album. Right. What have I got at number 2? At number 2, my second favourite artist of all time is Frank Zappa. Zappa made hundreds of albums. They're really quite incredibly like Coltrane. All his albums are very, very good. I can champion all the ones that people don't like Thing Fish and stuff like that, or maybe Reuben and the Jets. I could champion all those. If I was to say what's his greatest album, I would say it's One Size Fits All, but it's not my favourite album. My favourite album is Shake Your Booty. It's a double album. It's got an epic on there. It's got funny stuff on there. Tons of guitar solos, complexity. You've got Terry Bozzio on drums, who I love. Shake Your Booty is... my journey into Frank Zappa was I got Hot Rats, then I got Them or Us, and I nearly chose Them or Us. Very special album. But once I got into Them or Us, I went and bought Shake Your Booty. And it didn't leave my ears for about 2 years straight. I just absolutely loved it. I loved every little bit of it. I was quite young, so all the comedy stuff like Bobby Brown I thought was really funny and shocking. But it was just so full of interesting stuff. And when he does things like Rat to Margot and like splicing bass and guitar together and all the incredible stuff on there, it's just so full of joy. Adrian Belew is brilliant. I love Belew singing with Zappa. It's a certain sound that you only get on a few albums. And so Shake Your Booty, it sold 1 million copies. It's one of his biggest sellers. It's one of his greatest albums, without a doubt. Incredible cover with him, dressed up as a shake. And I mentioned this on a channel, and a couple of people went, oh my God, I cannot believe I hadn't noticed this. But of course, it's a pun on, I think, the tune Shake Your Booty by the Casey and the Sunshine Band. What's his worst album? Well, this album... it's not a bad album. It's just so weird. And it is Frank Zappa plays the music of Francesco Zappa. So when the synclavier is responsible for a couple of things on here, actually. When Zappa got his £250,000 synclavier, he realised he could now program music. He doesn't need musicians anymore. And he made the side 2 of Mothers of Prevention, and then he made Jazz from Hell. And, just before he died, he brought out his masterpiece, which is called Civilization Phase 3, which I'm a bit dubious about, actually. It's a very good album, but people at the time said it was his masterpiece. He couldn't be surpassed. There was a big hoo-ha, and it came out, and now nobody even mentions it. It's never mentioned. Yellow Shark, they do, which came out just before. Anyway, Francesco Zappa seemed like a joke. It was synclavier versions of this sort of Renaissance music created by a composer called Francesco Zappa. Francesco Zappa. You got Frank Zappa, and now he's some Renaissance composer making all these twiddly Renaissance tunes. And then you look into it, and there actually was a composer back in the day, 200 or 300 years ago, called Francesco Zappa, and these are his compositions. And I think the problem with this, although the experiment is interesting, Francesco Zappa is not Bach. This is a non-entity composer that made stuff at the time. Zappa has criticised classical music for being basically music just to please kings, and this is what this sounds like. If there's an irony in there, then I understand it, but a whole album of it, maybe a couple of tracks on an album, that would have been funny, but this is a whole album. And for me, the compositions aren't... It's not like Wendy Carlos doing Bach on Moog. It's not like that, because Bach's Bach, and these compositions are twee and nice, and you can stick it for a few tracks, and then after a while... I lose interest, and I just would never listen to this album. I've got it, but I will never listen to it. So that's what I've got. So at number 1, of course, I have John McLaughlin. You knew it was going to be John McLaughlin. I didn't watch this channel. I knows he's going to be at number 1. And what's my favourite album ever made? It's Visions of the Emerald Beyond by the Mahavishnu Orchestra with Narada Michael Walden on drums, the incredible Jean-Luc Ponty on violin. The greatest album ever made, as far as I'm concerned. I've got it here in the studio. I'll go and get it for you. Hang on. Wait there, you. Wait there. I've always got it at hand over here in the corner of the room. So, my favourite album of all time, for those of you who don't know, is Visions of the Emerald Beyond. Look at it. I show you this because people go, oh my God, you've got a gatefold version of it. I have. It's the greatest album ever made. I got my stereo in the corner of the room, and I came in here the other day, and a few of my mates were working, and there were quite a few people in here. It was when I shot the video with Steve Gould. And I said, Steve, have you ever heard Visions of the Emerald Beyond? And he's a big prog fan. And he went, I think so. I said, have you heard it? He went, I don't know. And I said, it's the greatest progressive rock album ever made. It is. And I put it on, and I'm sat there, And Steve goes, he goes, how many times you listen to this album, Andy? And I said, oh, thousands. And he goes, you still like it? And I went, yeah, and I do. That's my treat. I listen to other music and I'll go have a listen to them, and and sometimes because of the channel, I feel like I'm doing the work. If I'm having to go back and listen to Heaven and Earth again, which I did, it's a bit of a job, really. And a treat for me is to go, right, let's put Visions of the End World Beyond, and it's just the best album ever made. So that's I do have to explain it anymore. What's the worst John McLaughlin album? They're all really, really good. I couldn't think. They're all really good. And so rather than thinking that's the worst album, I thought, what album I'm probably never going to listen to again? Now, recently, with The Fourth Dimension, he's bought a lot of albums there. And I can't even remember the titles off the top of my head. Black Light I quite liked. That's a good album. But they all meld into one. And it's good stuff, but I feel he sort of settled down, he had settled down into a certain pattern until recently he decided to go back and revisit the Mavish Yorkshire, which he first did on Live at Ronnie Scott's, and then he brought that Mavish new live album out with Jimmy Herring. So I know it's in that period of time. I feel that recent albums like the new Shakti album and what was the album before that? See, I'm a massive John McLaughlin fan, and these albums aren't registering in me at all. And I'm trying to just show you that. I should know the name of the album that came out before that. It's got John like this. You know the one? Anyway, these newer albums, you can tell that they've been made by file sharing. The Shakti album sounds like it's been made. I was going to review the Shakti album on here, and I decided not to because I thought, I know I'll end up just slating it, and I don't want to slate it because Shakti I love, and there's something brilliant about it. I've got to be honest as well with the new Shakti album. There's a lot of Shankar Mahadevan on there, isn't there? I mean, he's on an album. He's on a bloody album, isn't he? And at some point, they made an album called Is That So? And that's the album I've got. Now, I put it out again this morning. It's a very beautiful album. Shankar Mahadevan is one of the great singers, Indian classical singers. He's apparently more famous than John McLaughlin in that world. It's very beautiful. John McLaughlin's playing mainly guitar synth, and he's creating these beautiful drones. It's interesting in that he's really applied even more Western harmony to this sort of Indian classical music tradition, which he'd explored on Floating Point, which is a really great album. But this album, there's nothing wrong with it. It's very tasteful, and McLaughlin solos on there. He solos using the synclavier, and Shankar goes, and does all this, that bit. I don't know. It's a good album. It's a really good album. If I was in the right mood, it's like you got all John McLaughlin's albums, and then you got this one album. It's a bit like Francesco Zappa. There's nothing wrong with it. It's great. But it occupies this... There's people out there probably who hate John McLaughlin that would like this album. People who do yoga. I've got to the end of the list. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy it, you can support me by putting a like on here. So put a like on it now. And thank you to whoever it was. Put your comments in. If you put your name in the comments that I came up with this idea, Andy, because I can't remember. I do get a lot of replies, and I read it, and then I thought I'm going to do this way after it. I thought, yeah, it is a good idea. And I couldn't go in and find the comments because there's a lot of comments going on, so I couldn't find who had done it. But if I do read it, I will pin it to the top so you can all thank whoever that bloke was or woman, most likely a bloke, for coming up with the idea. So have a check down below for that. Ooh, what else? Oh, yes. Subscribe to the channel, please. I've just gone over 40,000 and it's all going up a little bit now. Come on, subscribe. I've got about 250,000 people watching this regularly, and only 40,000 have subscribed. And it makes no difference, really. I'm quite happy where I am now, but at some point, I ain't going to have an Elvis Presley picture in the back over there, am I? I'm going to have one of them silver things. I got a student called Ben, and he's got a YouTube called the Worcester Terrariums. Now, I can say go and look at it if you want, but there's no bloody point because he's got about 2 million subscribers. And when he started it up sort of same time as me, and he just raced. He raced to 100,000 views, and there he is with his metal thing, and he's my student, and here I am. I haven't got a metal thing. And what does he do? Just put bits of old weeds in bottles. That's all he bloody does. Ben, if you're watching this, that's all you do. Here I am, using all my virtuosity, all my knowledge of music. I'm coming on here, I'm doing a video. You do a video every 3 weeks. I'm doing one every single day. You know, and all you're doing is sticking a bit of a plant in the bottom of a bloody old bottle or something. I can do that. Bit of dirt in there. You think make it out it's all hard with a bit of your pebbles, spraying your little bit of water on there, you know, and all your good lighting, and then your little creatures walking around all the place. I don't like little creatures. You might like your little frogs and spiders. I do. Look at this little cute spider. Little cute spiders aren't cute. Really not. And I tell you, if I had some spiders in the bottle, I know what I'd do with them. I wouldn't be saying they're cute at all. Bloody Worcester Terrariums, there he is. Jealous I am, I'm jealous. Anyway, come on, help me out. Stop making me look so silly with me 40,000 subscribers. I'm only up to 100,000, it's a long way to go yet. And I'm getting on. I mean, when's it going to happen? I mean, I look at it, I try and work it out. It's a couple of years yet, I suppose. A couple of years of doing this. I'm 100,000. If everybody just started subscribing, I'd get up there. And what difference does it make to you? It's a click. It's not going to kill you, is it? Click, subscribe. It's not going to kill you, is it? Doing that, flip, subscribe. I don't come on like everybody else at the beginning. You know, everyone else comes on, and don't they, at the beginning of the video? They're like, hi, and welcome to my video. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe right now. And then some of them try and sell you something. You know, my arse sometimes gets really itchy, and I use the super, the Apex arse scratcher. And then they pull it out, they scratch their arse with it. Ooh, I might get one of those, because so-and-so's got one of those. Somebody who's telling me how to do carpentry has just told me how he scratches his arse with his special arse scratcher. I don't do all that. I'm straight in. I don't mess around. Every YouTube video I put on, you click on it, you go, come on, forward through, come on, Rick Beato. You know, I'm going to tell you who the greatest guitarist is of all time who's left-handed, the 10 greatest left-handed guitarists of all time. But before we do that, I want to tell you about my Beato bundle. I know you've got a Beato bundle. I ain't going to buy that, Rick. My head's full. It's full of music theory. I know all the chords. C major, G7. I know all the scales. Lydian scales and all those types of scales. I know all that. I don't need just stupid books. I just want to know who the greatest left-handed guitarist is of all time. Tony Iommi. You know, that's all I'm interested in. And you go faffing along. You know, and then he says it every single time. He's like goes, this is the end of the video, and I know I'm on one at the moment. So everyone switch off now. If you like this stuff, then stay around. It's got nothing to do with the video, but I'm going to carry on. What does he say? It's like, this is Rick Beato 2, because he has 2 channels. And his rubbish channel, Rick Beato 2's probably got about 500,000 subscribers on it. And then he moans. You know, I know I've got 5 million subscribers on the main channel, but this channel, it hasn't got 5 million subscribers on. Okay, fair enough, Rick Beato. Spoilt Beato. That's what I call him. Spoilt Beato. And I want this one to have loads of subscribers. And when I looked at it, you lot, you're not subscribing. Subscribe to this one. You can subscribe to 2, and I'll have 2 big channels then. I need 2. One big channel's not good enough. I want 2. I want to be the king of YouTube music channels. I do. You know, that's what I want. I've got myself a big room now. You know, I used to be stuck in my garage. I was just thinking, fair enough. Rick Beato's got his big room, hasn't he? He's got his big room. He's got, I got bloody lights. Look, what do you think this is here? What's that? You know, Scotch mist. And I forgot to put this one on. I had a light here. I forgot to put it on. I got lights. I've got all the stuff he has. I've got a guitar here, look. I've got a guitar. I've just bought it. Look, still got the label off. I forgot to take the label off. I got the guitar. It's really out of tune. I could do a Rick Beato. Watch. This is how you tune a guitar. You need to get an E. Hang on. I got. That's an E. I could do that because my ears are so good. Now, if you want to tune guitar, put your finger on that bit and make them sound the same. And then move to the next and do it again. I knocked the other one out. Sorry. Then do it again. Now this is a tricky bit here. Once you get to here, you've got to move back here. Back to here now and do it here. That's surprisingly in tune. And then you get to the top. And then check it with a D chord. Go, You know, that's what Rick Beato does, doesn't he? That's what he does. You know, a bit of... I can substitute a minor chord there, tritone substitution. I'll do a dominant for the minor, and then another tri substitution, go to sharp 5. I know all that stuff, and I've got a big room. So why is it not happening for me? Why is it not happening for me? 40,000. I mean, it's more than most people I know's got, but I'm imploring you at the end of this video to subscribe to the channel. I really am. That was perhaps my greatest plea to subscribe to the channel. All YouTubers do it, but I think I may have done the greatest plea to subscribe ever. And I will not milk the next two, which is, of course, my Patreon. And there's a link down below for that. You can become a free member or a paid member. Or you could go and give me a tip by putting some money into my PayPal tip jar down below. If you think I did a good job on this video, if I've entertained you and made you a bit happy, right? And even if you were impressed by the top 10, I was in the mood for a rant. And when I'm in the mood for a rant, you get a rant. I can rant about anything, and it always, I feel calm now. I feel a level of calm. And the thing is, what's good about this, I've come to the new studio, it's all posh. I did my Crisps video the other day, and that helped, but it's such a nice space that I find it hard to rant. But what's happened there, I've just had a natural rant. Sometimes I know I've got to do a rant, and I go in there like a professional ranter, and I go, I'll do the list. When I get to that, I've got to do a rant. And I can produce it like an actor can cry, I can rant. But that was a natural rant. Like, that was method ranting, that was. Where it just happens, you know, just happens. And you've seen some virtuoso ranting there. So I should really get a tip for that, shouldn't I? Don't you think? Yeah, of course I do. We're at the end of the video now. How long's this one going to have? It's a really long one, isn't it? All right, see you all. Bye-bye.